Thank you for joining us for Satsang. So, let's just work a little bit with emotions. Healing emotions really has a lot to do with self-love. Somewhere that makes sense, right? I don't know how to explain it, but love, when it's on the emotional level, it's really the most powerful positive emotion. So if we can take that and apply it to our emotional upsets and emotional wounds, it's just the most powerful medicine. But what we need to do is we don't need to create the healing, just like with physical healing. If you have a cut, you don't have to make it heal. You just have to keep other stuff from interfering with the healing process. The body takes care of the healing, right? And there are like hundreds or thousands of processes involved, the cells multiplying, I mean, all of this, the nutrients going there. I mean, it's like incredible. And we don't have to know anything about it. So, but we do need to set the stage for that healing so it can occur, right? It's the same thing with emotions. So when we have an emotional wound, whether it's a temporary thing right now or something that's like ancient and comes back and back and back again, we are just responsible to connect our capacity for love, which is really profound, and we don't know that because we're hung up in negative emotions too much of the time, but to connect that capacity of love and that wound, and connect them together. And then we just, that's it, that's all the job we have to do. And then that healing can happen through that internal intelligence that we have that is awesome, like, you know, a simple cut, thousands of different processes. And that internal intelligence, that healing intelligence, takes care of the whole thing. It's just like the intelligence that allows life to grow in a womb. You know, two cells come and they know exactly what to do, and they merge into a new cell, and then a whole new being appears with this enormous complexity that we have as human beings, right? So we have to just have a little inkling of this tremendous intelligence of creativity and healing that's inside of us. So to set the stage now, we need to know the two poles. You know, one is our deepest heart, our spiritual heart. That's where all the love that is possible, period, exists inside of us. Now, this is something that's just generally not known, or we just don't think about it. But think about Buddha or Jesus or any great saint. They had the same potential we have. They just knew to use it a lot better. But the potential is there. In other words, the presence of that love can be accessed right inside of us. So that's one pole, right? The other pole is the manifestation of the stressful emotion. And emotions are a combination of thoughts and body sensations. So we can access them on the level of thoughts, and we can access them on the level of body sensations. So today we're going to work with the level of body sensations. Thoughts is a different story. We do that separately in a different way because they take different practice. Now, the first stumbling block for most of us is that we don't know, or we're sort of tuned out of our difficult emotions. And that happens because in childhood, we may have had stressful emotions many times, and nobody showed us what really to do with it. And so what we do is we just push them away. We kind of separate ourselves. It gets very powerful when somebody has a trauma, like a rape or some kind of terrible accident or something like that. What happens is that the consciousness then splits off, and it's like you're watching yourself from outside of you in that situation, because emotionally you can't handle it. So you have sort of a partial or pretty substantial out-of-body experience, and this part of your mind just sort of goes away, and you split off from what's happening to you emotionally. Now, when that's not healed, it can become a pattern, and there's many of us who in varying forms are cut off from our emotions. So the first thing we need to do is kind of practice how to get in touch with the emotions. And there may be old messages in there that say, oh no, this is not safe. Understandable. If you had like really painful emotions or long periods of fear or abandonment or something like that, you know, you just don't want to go there. But it's a trap, because if we don't go there, we cannot create that internal situation for healing. We cannot connect these two poles, that love inside the deepest heart and the emotion itself. So we have to find where that emotion displays itself as a body sensation. Luckily, it's actually easy to do. You have to have the right understanding, or that part of you that says, oh no, I'm not going there, it'll just be too strong, right? So you understand, oh, I'm doing this for healing. And yes, it may be uncomfortable. You know, sometimes medicine isn't all that sweet. And if you're not ready to deal with a certain emotion or a certain part of your history, that's perfectly okay. Then work on what you're ready on, what you're ready for, and slowly you gain in strength, and eventually you can go into the deep, dark places also, because they won't scare you that much anymore. You know that you can handle this stuff. But it's all not happening overnight. It's like the injuries that we carry, the old patterns that we've sort of just repeated over and over again, they took a while to come about. So, you know, we live in this culture, you know, I want yesterday, hoppity hop. And that inner maturation and transcendence of our muddy old self that we're not very happy with, it doesn't go overnight. It happens in an organic fashion, right? So let's go to, how do we find, and first of all, let me say, for some people it's very easy to get in touch with their emotions. So if that's the case with you, then you can do this, but it's not that important for you. But for other people, it's really important, especially men, but sometimes also women, are just cut off from their emotions. So what do? You bring back into your memory an event that you know was emotionally upsetting. Now, if it's easy for you to feel your emotions, you may just feel it right away on the level of the body, as a body sensation. There may be a churning in the gut, or a knot in the gut, or a heaviness in the chest, or tight shoulders, clenched jaw, lump in the throat, you know, all of those things. It could be anywhere, it could be any sensation. Some sensations are throughout the whole body. Some sensations show up as just an emptiness, like a nothingness, that can be scary when you don't know what it is, that it's really nothing to be afraid of, right? So if it's easy for you to feel that, great, then you're already there. But if you have that kind of split from your emotions, that old message that it's not safe to feel, then you may know, like, I'm anxious now, remembering this particular event, or I'm depressed, or something like this, but it's just, you're just in your head. You can't feel it past the neck down, right? But it's not that hard to overcome that. So bring up a memory of a stressful emotional situation. It doesn't matter how long ago it is. It could be when you were 5 years old. And then step into that memory. Be there. Don't have it sort of an outside memory. Step into it. And that will bring up some of these feelings. Now, if you're dealing with something that's very powerful, you can remember something important here. You have to sometimes kind of tell yourself those things very carefully. You've survived the real thing, right? You're here. If you survive the real thing, does it stand to reason that you will survive the memory of it? Right? The memory is like a shadow of it. And yes, it can be very uncomfortable. But you're safe because you're just dealing with something that is replaying in the mind. It's like a tape that has played God knows how many times. You're not dealing with the real sensation, the real event where you were perhaps in danger and so on, right? So we just have to be aware of that, so we keep a perspective on it, right? So then mentally scan through your body. When you have that memory present, mentally just scan through the body and experience what the body feels like. And there may be a number of different sensations present. Some of them may just be because you're sitting here and you feel the weight of your body on the cushion. And some others may be connected with that emotion. And then you can see maybe one of these sensations that are created by the emotion is the strongest one. So identify which one that is. And then identify the exact location where you feel that in your body. Let's kind of get your coordinates here. Oh, this is like, a half an inch over the belly button. It feels like this hard ball of some kind of nasty material. Or it feels like this tension, my right shoulder, where the right shoulder feels like it's lifted up and can't relax. Something like that. So describe to yourself how you feel that emotion, how it's coming out right now. Very good. And what you're doing right now is already paying attention to something that we otherwise just want to brush under the rug. We want to just escape from it. We don't want to feel it. So what you're already doing, you're beginning to bring some loving attention to this part of you. And just notice that. So now let's take this a step further. Feel that sensation in the body that is created by the emotion. And simply open up to it. Yes, it may be uncomfortable, but you can handle it. Be present with that sensation. And what you're doing right now is you're encountering this part of you that needs help. That's wonderful. So you can encounter this part of you that needs help from a desire to really be good to yourself. And where does that count the most? Not where everything is easy, but where it's difficult. In that place of the difficult emotion. So you're bringing this attention there with like a gift of kindness to you. And it's all you have to do. You don't have to do anything else. Just keep your awareness on that place where that sensation manifests. And notice what happens to the sensation. And the deeper you can bring your attention into it, the deeper the healing can happen. So when a thought comes and interferes with your concentration, just notice that and let it go. And bring your attention back to that place where that sensation manifests. These emotions are just like little children that are hurting. And you know what to do with the little child that's hurting. You know how to console them. You know to be there for them, to be present, to be open. Then you see that this sensation in your body might just dissolve. Or it could dissolve in the place where you're focusing and appear somewhere else. And just follow that. Follow the wisdom of the body that takes you to one place after another for this progressive healing. Or it could be that this sensation just stays where you first was. Then go deeper and deeper into it with this intention for healing, bringing the very kindness of your soul into it. Notice how you are able to bring this kindness, this healing to that emotion, to that part of you that needs help. Notice you have this capacity to heal what is out of balance, what is hurting, through the power of love. And you can stay with this emotion now. You'll know what to do. Or if the emotion is dissolved, you can bring your attention into the Hridayam, your spiritual heart, in the very core of your being. And imagine there this sun, this source of warmth and light deep in your chest, radiating effortlessly into your whole being, and especially into all the places of emotional discomfort. And receive this warmth and this love, this inner luminosity. Receive it fully, open to it, like a flower opens to the sun. And let this light shine down right into the marrow of your bones. Let it warm even the last places that have been cold and forgotten for so long. And you don't need to know where they are. Just have that intention to love yourself profoundly. To be really good to yourself. So feel this internal emergence of kindness and caring and love in you. And know that to be you. Know that this is always available to you. And those emotions and thoughts that stand in the way of it are simply what we practice on. This is what we practice on our capacity to love. Whatever suffering we have is our practice arena. And the good thing about suffering is that it's all a passing show. Only this pristine love and light in our deepest core is timelessly who we are. That will never change. And we're going toward it with every moment of being more aware, every opening to love that arises from within. And you can now set an intention to remember to open to your difficult emotions, to find them where they display themselves in the body, to open to them, to pay attention to them, to heal them with the power of love that is in you. Until at every moment when a difficult emotion arises, this will be your natural response. You don't have to think, let me see, what am I going to do now? No. You just embrace it with that caring attitude. So take a deep breath. Let's start with our 3 ohms so we're properly yogic here. Take a deep breath. Relax. And certainly we come from all kinds of different experiences throughout the day, and we come together, and then we use this Om to just, did you notice it? It's like a tuning an instrument, right? The first Om was sort of like, yeah, all kinds of different voices, and then at the end it was just a blending perfectly. That's what happens in Satsang. So, emotional healing. You know, and whatever emotion, I mean, they're relatively easy to identify. We know kind of what we have in life. We have a tendency to be anxious or to be stressed or to be angry or whatever. So identify that for you, and you may have a short list. And then ask yourself, yeah, what's the exact opposite of that for you? Maybe different, you know, when I say anger, the opposite may be different for different people, right? So identify what the opposite is for you, and that's what the negative emotion is for. So when you encounter that negative emotion, not the way we usually do, which is with fight, flight, indulge, and complain, but with openness, with that great power of love that is just waiting inside of us to be used and to be experienced, then that pattern of emotion, through repeated work, not overnight, but it turns into its opposite. I mean, it just makes sense, because I used to be this rageaholic. I had this really nasty habit. Yeah. I don't like to be angry, so I stuffed it, and I stuffed it, and I stuffed it some more. And then after a while, it would just burst out, and I would be creating a horrible scene. And I had to deal with it. you know, I had to deal with it. And in the process, I was learning how. It took me a long time. It was not a very smart tack there, but, you know, it worked after a while. And now this has not happened in a long time. So the opposite of that manifests, you know. For me, the opposite of anger is love. And I've just been so blessed by it because I had to work on it. I couldn't like be asleep on that level. Because you know that something is not true to who you are because it hurts. It's stressful. That's why it's stressful, because it's not true to who we are. And that's why the good feelings, the good emotions feel good, because they're true to who we are. So I wanted to just also mention a new chapter in this teaching, and it's called Weird Shit. Weird shit is what sometimes happens on this spiritual journey. It's like stuff happens to you and you can't explain it. You don't know what the hell is going on. Like I had an event one time, and I'm just talking about that to lead into what just recently happened to me. I had this event where I was finally ready. Only took me 50 years, this one. I was pretty quick on it. But I remembered an incident where apparently, at least that's how it was stored in my memory as I found out, my mother had yelled at me, "You're a terrible child." And I was like 3 or 4 years old. And at that moment, all the great love that she had for me was out, and I believed that one, but only for 50 years, right? So 50 years later, I was finally ready to kind of let that come out of my subconscious mind where I had repressed it. And you repress these things in childhood because they're just too painful to deal with. But for all those 50 years, throughout the time of being with my guru, who loved me like unbelievably, and he just was that love. It wasn't even personal, he was just radiating it. And there was always that thing in the back of my mind where I couldn't feel good about myself. It's called shame. And I had a pretty big case of it that always spoiled everything. You know, I could be happy for a little while and then that would come back in again, right? And then I was finally ready to see this. And what happened was that in one moment it came up, the memory came up, and at the same time I collapsed on the floor, bang, my back went out. And I couldn't move. It was like my back was really out. Never happened to me before. I just couldn't stand up. And it took me like 2 seconds to get my bearings. This was after a lot of spiritual work, right? So it wasn't like I was not a beginner at that time. I got my bearings and I went into ecstasy because I realized that it was such a gift for some old repressed terror inside of me to come up and to be seen. Because when we can't see it, we're suffering from it. We're a victim of it, of our own unconscious baggage. So then I got myself off the ground. I was in a hotel with a big group that made that sort of a big, very safe environment. And I went up to my hotel room and I laid there and I worked on my mind and my emotions for about 2 hours, and I was clear of this. This thing was over and it has not come back. And then I hobbled back down, holding my back to where my friends were. And they looked at me and said, "What happened to you? You're like glowing." And I was in pain, physically, right? But I was just elated because I knew this old curse had come to an end. I was able to free myself of it, right? So that was just in my memory when about, I don't know, a week ago or so, my whole body started to do another trip. And suddenly I was like walking all crooked for a day. And you know, it's still happening. I'm going to see, I found a great chiropractor, so she's helping me pull it back together. My acupuncturist is helping me, but You know, the main work is always inside of you, but these things happen. This time I have no idea what it is, but my sort of the way I held my body together has kind of come unglued. And I'm waiting for that to sort of put itself back together in a higher order of functioning. And in the past, this kind of stuff would like really depress me, and I would have a whole trip in my head about it. But now it's just sort of I'm watching it happening, and I'm kind of grateful, even though I don't know exactly what it's about. But I know all of these things are for the good. All of these things are for the good, right? Now, the reason why I'm talking about it is not because I'm so important, but I want to just highlight that these type of things happen to us. It's like at one point or other in this spiritual journey, suddenly it's like something goes weird and different, and you may not sleep for several nights. Or some old depression may come back that you thought was long gone. I know somebody who didn't eat for a month. She just didn't eat. There was nothing inside of her that wanted to eat, you know? And what I'm saying is don't worry about it. Just like flow with it, flow through it. All kinds of stuff happens, or strange energetic experiences like heat rising up the spine. Well, that's a typical Kundalini experience, you know? But it could be other things. Sometimes at night I have this sort of energy feeling in my feet and hands, like you're jumping out of your skin, right? It's a Shakti just getting sort of rearranged inside of our bodies. What happens is that as the potential yogic beings that we are, there is just this great openness, or this potential of this great open energy flow inside of our bodies. But that's not how we've been living. We've been living, you know, eating McDonald's and rock and rolling and taking drugs or whatever the hell we've been doing, right? And so they talk about these thousands of nadis or energy channels in the subtle body. They all need to be kind of cleaned out. So that happens sometimes slowly and we don't even notice. And sometimes it happens like there's a big push and then we have some type of symptom. Now, take care of yourself medically. If there's something, you know, get yourself checked out. But if the doctors can't figure out what it is, I wouldn't get all that worried about it, because it could just be one of those things that passes through, like this thing with my body. I'm getting help, but it'll just, after a little while, it'll come back together and it'll be in a new and improved constellation. So, you know, I'm all for that. So I'm just saying this because we all deal with strange things on the spiritual path, you know, and it starts perhaps before any of these symptoms are, that many of us have this feeling like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't fit here, right? You know, socially, you may not have felt that you belong as a child, or this is very common with spiritual people who don't know they're spiritual because we're just kids and we want to fit in and we want to be with our buddies and we want to be looked upon as great and cool and, you know, date the quarterback and whatnot. But something inside of us may just feel like somehow I'm different. And then what happens with that is the mind then makes it into shame. There's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not cool enough. You know, I'm a nerd. I'm a freak. When we were back when we actually made freak into sort of a badge of honor, we're the freaks when I was young, right? But then I found out I was a yogi, and that's a whole different ballgame. But you know, you can realize that you actually have this affinity to the yogic lifestyle, but the old shame stuff is still there. So you have to deal with it. Shame is, you know, shame and guilt are different, so we need to distinguish them. They're very different. Guilt is when you do something wrong, and then you kind of, it feels off. And that's a good thing, because then that teaches us not to repeat it or to change, or, and guilt is a very healing emotion. Actually, it doesn't feel good, but it's good to have, because it teaches us. It's like, oh, this particular action doesn't really jive with my conscience, doesn't feel right with me, and then we can change and we can learn and grow. But shame is very different. Shame is the message that I'm not okay. Your guilt, I did something that wasn't okay. Shame is I am not okay. And just like with my thought that I carried for 50 years, it can be just an incredible burden, and it can really stick inside of us, So how do we deal with that? We deal with that with everything we're doing in yogic practice. Every time you deal with your emotions like we just did, it like takes off a tiny little layer. Maybe it's not a huge thing. Maybe it takes off something. It takes off another layer, take off another layer. Eventually you get to the deeper stuff, but then you're ready. You can handle it. You can work with the mind. You work with the work of Byron Katie, and you peel away that thought and this thought and that thought. And after, eventually, this is what happened to me, was in the environment of Katie's school. And suddenly I was just ready to see this one. And when you see it, now we know what to do with it, right? We question our stressful thoughts, looking for the truth. And then what we see is that the stressful thoughts just aren't true. But that just to say that to yourself is not going to free you. So you actually have to do the work. You have to find the stressful thoughts, question them, and then they leave you. Just like the painful emotions. We don't get rid of them. We don't let them go. These are all concepts that are used, but it's not really correct. They leave us. All we have to do is sort of like, we got one wire that's charged and another wire. Here's the heart, here's our capacity to love, and here is the stressful emotion, and we need to connect them. That's all we need to do. And then that healing can occur. So we started with emotional healing. Any questions on that? Any comments? Did you do all right with this meditation that we just had? Yeah, I see heads nodding. Anybody sort of had a problem or a question with it? Anybody have any examples of weird shit? That's the yogic term. I can't help it, Whatever happened to you that you would put in that category? That's instructive to share, because I can only tell what I had, but everybody has like different varieties of these things.
Well, I think that nothing happens by coincidence. Tonight, Nancy invited me here, and the fact that you're speaking about emotional healing, I've been in a depression because I'm going through a breakup, and for the last like 2 days, I've been feeling like a lot of heat in my body, and without even looking at the address. And she had texted me the address. I ended up on the street without and then when you started the topic, and I went back into the meditation and started going in within and identifying. And then I liked how you explained about shame, because I don't feel like I'm part of, I do feel like I'm weird. And
Welcome to the club.
Yes. Like I'm, I could be so friendly and so outgoing, and in my, I'm a therapist, so I work with the public, but then I'm an introvert, and like I like to be alone a lot of the time, and I'm just like kind of like figuring out really who I am. And I did party. I'm 8 months sober now, without any drinking or anything, taking better care of myself. And then you also said self-love, how the two emotions are, tied in together. And it's just like I kind of just been like listening to everything that you said, and it's exactly where I'm at right now.
Yeah, so just let it happen. That's really, when weird shit happens, just let it happen. Take care of yourself, but let it happen. Don't get, it's like when we get into the drama of it, we create suffering for us. Like I could now go, oh my God, what's going on with my body? I'm all achy and my neck's not turning this way and all that kind of stuff. So what? That'll change. None of this stuff is permanent, We get too riled up about all that stuff. Just let it happen and let it pass through and be happy. There was a question, so I'm going to shift a little bit. There was a question about the ego. Rose asked, the ego and how the ego relates to the three gunas. Okay. Everybody know what the three gunas are? No. Okay. So there are three qualities. You all know the yin and yang symbol, right? This is from the Chinese tradition. And when you look at that kind of squirrely thing, there is a dark side and a light side, but there's a dark circle or spot inside the light field and a light inside the dark. So in other words, yin and yang, those two elements, male and female, high and low, good and bad, they all sort of merge within each other, and in the flow of life, we go from one to the other, but there's always something of the other in each one. I'm making sense here? Not saying it very well, right? So in India, you have the same kind of principle, but it's three qualities that are in all of nature. And those three qualities are, there's a quality of heaviness, of unconsciousness, of darkness, of dullness, and it's called tamas. And the color is black. And then you have a quality that is active, rajas, right? Active, doing, right? The color is red, like passion, right? And then you have a quality that's called sattva, and that is enlightening and light and conscious, and the color is gold, right? Now, these three qualities are in everything that exists. You get some things that are very high, very incredible, but there's just a little bit of tamas in that too. In our lives, for instance, we need the tamasic energy. When that's not there, we don't sleep. Tamasic energy puts you to sleep at night, for instance, But these three qualities are now also in the ego. And when we talk about, I talk in other places, I talk about three types of ego. One is the ego of suffering. Then we have the ego of aspiration and the ego of the sage. So let's have a look at what that was, these three types of ego, how they correlate to the three gunas, right? When your sense of self is deeply embedded, in other words, when you have this materialistic consciousness, I am the body, I'm this personality, all you know is the ego, right? Which is where most people on this planet are at, most of the time. Then Tamas, Rajas, and Sattvic energies are all there, and you just live along. And that's the ego of suffering. You have highs, you have lows, but you don't have an aspiration for enlightenment. So your highs and your lows are there, but you're basically moving in circles. You're not going anywhere much, right? Over the long run, in the evolution of the soul, there's something going on. There's some souls who come down into this physical universe. They get more tamasic, they go more into suffering to experience that. And when the soul has had enough suffering, after sometimes many, many lifetimes, something in that soul starts to mature and starts to look for something else, look for the end of suffering. And with that, when that begins, then there's a shift into the ego of aspiration, right? So now you have a spiritual aspiration. And that is a fundamental shift. In other words, you become different. And that's why so many of us, when we were children, we suffered from that sense of being different because we were already there as souls. But we don't know this as children because you haven't found your spiritual calling. You just want to fit in naturally when you're 13 with your buddies or your friends, you know? And you just don't quite, you know? And if you did fit in, that's okay too. It doesn't have to be that way, but it's just like that for a lot of spiritual people. Souls who have that aspiration already may not have woken up to that in this life yet, and they feel like they don't fit, right? They don't fit because they're really qualitatively a different soul. And what happens in terms of the gunas is that this mix of sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic energies that just sort of works as this, the ego of suffering. They all sort of mixed together, like, you know, and they're just doing their thing for many lifetimes. And suddenly something happens to the sattvic element. And the sattvic element is just like your higher understanding. Disassociates itself from the rajasic and tamasic energies in your life. There's something, some insight that it's like more important to meditate than to be out in the bar or getting late or you know, going dancing every night. That sattvic element, that enlightening element starts to sort of get it in itself, and it starts to rule the other two elements. They're still there, but the sattvic element, that aspiration, starts to rule who you are. And that is that shift into spiritual awareness. And we live at a time where that's happening to millions of people on this planet, which is really new for this planet. There have always been some, of course, but never like this many. So then the ego of the sage is again different. The ego of the sage, you know, the sage lives in a physical body, has a personality, has all of this going, but there's an awareness that's truly transcendent, it's beyond that. And he or she sees the personality just moving along and all the gunas do their thing and stuff, but there's no longer an identification with it, right? And sages get parking tickets and, you know, they just have a normal life on the physical plane, but in their consciousness, they're no longer identified with it. They use this form of their body and personality as a vehicle to act out their compassionate impulse toward other beings. And then, of course, you have the idea, the bodhisattva idea of people who are in that space and consciously postpone their full enlightenment, which means they're merging into the Supreme. They consciously postpone that out of compassion for all beings. You know, Dalai Lama is a good example of that. They just keep coming back for us schmucks to help us along, because we need all the help we can get. As far as in the Tibetan tradition, for instance, I remember when Dilgo Khyentse, who's one of the two primary gurus of the Dalai Lama, and this just unbelievable man, when he died, the Tibetans came together and held these huge ceremonies. There's this big stupa, one of those sacred buildings in India, a huge place in Nepal rather, Kathmandu Valley, called Bodhnath. And they lit 100,000 butter lamps on that building, and it was just lit up by 100,000 lamps, just from their devotion, as a prayer to ask him to come back to this forsaken planet and to help us. And sure enough, he was reborn a few years later, and he's now, I think, in his teens, this new incarnation. So, this awareness of these cultures in me is this exquisite of knowing, seeing through the appearance of things and seeing the deeper story that we're all living, whether we know it or not. Yes, Leslie.
Do you think that the diagnosis, probably not all of it, but a lot of the diagnosis of something like bipolar is just people that haven't found that sattvic sense in them, and they're living in the ego-driven, tamasic, rajasic, up and down?
You can't really, I don't think we can make a statement like that, because what is diagnosed as, for instance, bipolar disease in different people can be completely different. It's like really you have to look at each individual. And certainly there are people who receive a diagnosis from a psychiatrist or something like this, or maybe are put on drugs and so on. And the dangerous thing is that then they believe the diagnosis, right? That's really a very dangerous thing. It's of course very good to have a diagnosis and to know what's going on and to help the people who actually have that, right? But then there's always cases where a diagnosis is used and it's not really correct, because a lot of spiritual people have weird shit happening to them, right? And then that's not a true case of that whatever particular diagnosis is given, right? I know, for instance, we knew this, I used to work in recovery, and in this recovery center, especially the cocaine addicts, the cocaine and crack addicts, it's like striking, because they were all bipolar. 100% they were bipolar. And once they got off their crack for a few weeks, those symptoms totally left. So they weren't bipolar, it just mimicked the withdrawal from that particular drug, mimicked bipolar disease to the T. But when they got a little sobriety, that just went away. And I know other people who got a bipolar diagnosis. Some of them considered it to be true, they had those symptoms, but they were spiritual people and they dealt with it in a different way, and they got beyond the need for drugs. Some of them continued to take some drugs and so it's very different from person to person, But if you can make it without a diagnosis, if whatever happens to you is not it doesn't need that kind of sometimes a bit heavy-handed approach, even though it can be a lifesaver for other people. You see, it's like, again, very individually different. If you can deal with what's going on with you without a diagnosis, without having to identify it as a thing, like I have depression, right? Well, if you do, then it's okay to know and to do the appropriate thing. But what is depression other than a state of mind? And if you know, I'm just taking this as a for instance, if you know what to do with your mind, with your thinking, with your emotions, you see? So depression, let's take depression. How does it manifest? It manifests on your thinking level. It manifests as an emotion. It manifests in behavior. You can't get up in the morning. And it manifests on the physical level, like your brain chemistry is off, right? So you can then take a pill on the physical level. You can change your behaviors, like get yourself up in the morning and stuff like that. You can work on your emotions, and you can work on your thoughts. Now, one of the problems can be, I'm saying, I have depression. Boom, it's a thought. Now, on the thought level, I can make it into a thing, right? Now, oh yeah, I have depression. Like, I believe this. Now it becomes heavier, right? And then your mind, that notion that you have depression, where it can be helpful for some, for others it can be a downer, it can be a problem, right? So again, individually very different. But the interesting thing is when you, on these 4 levels, where is the level of cause? Now, when you talk to a physician, they would say, oh, it's a chemical imbalance, or some physician at least, not the good ones, right? They think, oh, it starts there. Everything starts in the body, right? We need to just medicate, 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 right? Bad medicine, in my view, right? In my view, it starts on the subtle level. It starts with thought, and it triggers down into emotion, into behavior, into physical manifestation. It gets more heavily manifest each time. But if you change the mind, if you change the thoughts, then that whole sequence of that depression takes no longer takes place. And it's interesting when you help somebody to investigate a thought like, I have depression, and they really go down into that, they can never find it. Because it's just a concept, you see? But again, it's like, I can't make a rule out of this because it's very different. Everybody needs to deal with these things in a different way because everybody's different. The principles are true, but you know, if I have some high principle that it starts with thinking and somebody just cannot deal with their thoughts because it has so manifested that it's so heavy that they really just have to deal with it in a different way, then that has to be honored and they have to be helped to deal with it that way. Yeah, you had something else?
Well, I mean, I had just, as you know, my dad passed, I came back and I just like crashed when I got back. There were a lot of different things going on, but one of them was having depression. And in the past, when I felt that emotion, I've been like, oh my God, something's wrong with me. This is terrible. This is never going to end. And that those thoughts would pop in, but I've learned through you how to love myself. And so I started going, well, if I'm tired and I need to sleep, like that's because I need to sleep. And so it was what you were talking about with the weird shit, like just letting my body go through the process and just being gentle with it and not resisting it was super helpful. There's no reason we have to be anything but what we are in that moment. And it was like, if I have to shut down and just shut everything up, that's what I need to do for a while. And it was really different and much shorter experience.
Good, yeah, exactly. The cycles, the cycles in depression usually, they just get shorter and shorter. They get overall less deep, although that's not always true because you may have parts of your depression that are so deep that you could never visit them. And so when you're stronger, you can actually go there and clean out that too. Did you continue your different practices?
You know what, slowly. When I would have a thought of being unkind to myself in the process, whether it's, doing something that's just not loving, I would instead, go, oh, okay, now I have some choices because I have the practices. So let's go to Ramgiri, let's go do yoga, let's go do something out there that is positive and just chip it away at it, not do a big blown out.
And also
schedule.
know that even though you know what to do, you're not always able to do it yet. And to love yourself in that place also.
Right.
It's like, so yeah, we have these skills, but maybe I'm just too screwed up right now to pull out a worksheet or whatever, right? And it's okay. But that love, that deep kindness is always there. You can just count on it. You can rest on that. And yes, you may not be able to feel it, then try to observe at least that state, right? Use the witnessing. Just, okay, so I'm just screwed up right now and I can't feel that and I can't do anything. I'm just vegging out here and okay, right? And okay, that can be the act of self-love that's required at that moment, right? And then out of that, a greater strength starts to occur. And the next time you're in that place, maybe you can do something more constructive. And it's all fine, just like the way we're screwed up didn't come about in a day, but we can unscrew us much quicker than it took to get there, much quicker, especially with these skills. I should ask, anybody have any questions? If you're with us online, please type them in. We're sort of doing a practical practice run here today of practical things and emotional stuff that we're dealing with. So
there are no questions, but Rose said two things. One is body sensations. So as you are speaking of the gunas, my spine is flushed with waves of heat. Swaha means
great.
And then,
This also, you mentioned the waves of heat and stuff. That's like a really clear thing. It's like Kundalini is just, that usually comes out as heat. It can also come out as light. It can also sometimes make you a little crazy. That can happen too, and just flow with it. Just don't, I had one friend, to me, this was just a really bad example, and I want to mention it. I have great respect of the medical traditions and the art of psychiatry. There's a tremendous amount of good that's being done. The shortcoming that is in those professions is that spirit is not recognized as a factor. And when you have a spiritual person who is treated as a body, then often it doesn't work well. And I had one friend who was just this young guy, sort of somewhat labile, not very together, but clearly a spiritual being. And he made the big mistake to enlist in the army because he wanted to get some strength or something. He was just a little too floaty. He was like, I don't know, 18 or something at the time, right? And in boot camp, he had a nervous breakdown. And the brilliant psychiatrist there told him, oh, you're schizophrenic, you're always going to be schizophrenic. Here is some whatever they gave him, some pretty heavy drugs in those days. This is a long time ago. The drugs had a lot more side effects than they have today. And the problem was he believed it. And he got disability, good money. So there was a secondary reason to stay sick, right? Make a long story short, he went to all kinds of different diagnoses. It's like the next psychiatrist told him, no, you're not schizophrenic, you're bipolar, take this. And then it was shifted from one diagnosis to another. He never had any of this. He just had a breakdown because he was in the wrong place. He wasn't supposed to be there. I mean, obviously he was supposed to be there in this greater truth of things, but it was not good for him to be in boot camp. It was just, he was not ready for that level of, churning that he was put through. And he never surfaced out of that mad state, that sort of induced mad state. So, these things happen. I worked with a lot of people who've been in the process of the healing establishment and did much better outside of it. But again, there's no hard and fast rule. You have to really look at every person. It's also true that spiritual people can have serious depression and serious anxiety and all of those kind of things. So I have this thing going on with my body. I go to the chiropractor. Of course we do. So it's not black or white. It takes very sensitive approach when you work with the mind, especially. So I'm going to say something more to Rose about this, the three gunas and the ego. In this great story, this great epic of the Ramayana in India, there are three principal demons. There is one, the primary one is called Ravana. And this, the whole story is sort of the war of the divine incarnation Rama, who is going to go and kill Ravana, the primary demon, right? But Ravana has two brothers. One of them is Kumbhakarna. And the other one is, what's his name? Vibhishana, right? So they represent the three gunas and how they manifest in the ego, because of course the demons are representative for the ego, right? The way we think we're limited, right? So Kumbhakarna is, so the sages who wrote these stories, they're just incredible to be able to take these sublime truths and embed them in these stories. Kumbhakarna is seen as this huge thing, mountain of a man who sleeps most of the time, and when he wakes up, he eats buffaloes and horses and all kinds of stuff and everything, just bad news, right? But luckily, he sleeps most of the time, tamas, the tamas element, just, right? Then you have Ravana, and he is the 10-headed monster. And he rules the show of the demons, the demon land, right? And the 10-headed monster, remember, just imagine what trouble we have with one head. He had 10. God, imagine the mayhem that's going on, right? And they're all arguing with each other, of course, So that's Ravana. And then you have Vibhishana. And Vibhishana lives in the city of the demons and sort of serves his two brothers. He's in there with his two brothers, right? But he's not quite of the same ilk, So he has some remembrance of God, but it's not ripe. It's not, he's in with his brothers, right? So that's the ego of suffering, right? And then Hanuman, who is faith and devotion, jumps over to the land of the demons and comes and visits, finds Vibhishana and connects with him. And Vibhishana gets faith and devotion, right? And what happens is he then goes and he confronts Ravana, the main bad brother, the Rajasic element, the way our ego is always doing. Look at our society. We're like human doings. You have to do, right? That's that demonic element that is not serving us. So Vibhishana goes over to Ravana and talks to him and sees that there is no hope and tries to talk some sense into him, but it's not working. And so he then leaves the city of the demons and goes over to Rama's camp, and Rama receives him with open arms. So in other words, the sattvic element gets the thought of enlightenment, right? And with that, the story changes. Now, the two main demon brothers, the Rajasic and Tamasic element, they're sort of by themselves. And the higher aspect of us is having this different goal, this goal of enlightenment, right? And with that, the end of the demon race is already kind of decided, right? The end of the ego of suffering is already decided, right? Then it's just the war continues until there's this standoff between Ravana and Rama. Kumbhakarna gets killed a little earlier. And so what that means is like our fascination with what blinds us and how we create suffering for ourselves, that gets stripped off. That's the death of the demon, right? That's what that means. And that gets stripped off, and increasingly we're free until we're able to transcend the whole thing. And then life becomes an entirely different show. It becomes a way of living in a world of love, where even the most cruel and brutal things, they are cruel and brutal. They're not, we don't sugarcoat this, right? But somehow you experience yourself as not fully part of that world. Now, that doesn't always work 100%, because even saints get caught in holocausts, and Tibetan lamas get killed in the occupation of Tibet, and so on, right? So we have to really understand that not from a level of incarnation, but from a level of the soul. Because we have both an evolution in our physical personhood in this life, but we also have a greater evolution on the level of the soul that may go through will go through many incarnations. And once you catch the bug, once you have that aspiration for enlightenment, you go through ups and downs. You go through good and bad times, because that's how we learn. But everything can only get better. So rest in that. And we don't have to engineer our enlightenment. We're being taken. We're being taken. And we can trust in that. That's the development of faith, that there is a greater force in us that is in the process of liberating us. And our job is not to make that happen. That's already happening. Our job is just to try our best not to get so much in the way of it. Mm-hmm. It's like we're in the elevator and we press the top floor button, right? The elevator is going, and you can be in the elevator and enjoy the ride, or you can claw on the walls and say, I want it to stop, this is going too fast, or whatever, right? Not necessary, but we still do it out of old habit. So let's just take the elevator, let it go. It's fine. Have a good time. Have satsang. Sing. Love. Be merry. That's especially annoying with bhaktas, the people who are on this path of devotion, because all they can ever think is to party in this sort of divine way. And that's what transports the soul. And people who are into the wisdom path are much more serious about things. But you can just find that place of love, whether it's love of a God of your understanding, whether that's an external entity or God's presence here. Whatever works for you, just go for it. And love yourself. Today in that meditation on healing emotions, It wasn't exactly how we do the heart sourcing meditation, but it's just, it all flows in together, right? You all tasted that sweetness. And it's maybe not right away obvious that it's sweetness because you're focusing on some kind of heavy emotion, right? But give it some time. There's this great sweetness inside of the heart, this great essence, this great juice. Give it some time, drink it, receive it, receive it. Don't be so serious about this enlightenment thing. Know that you're being taken. And if weird shit happens, let it happen and it'll pass. Richard, I mean, I hang out with Ram does, he has weird shit happen with his stroke, and there's a lot of suffering in that. And at first he lost his faith for a little bit, but then he got it back and deeper, much deeper. And now he is in a place that is just wonderful because he let go of so much, and he was so intellectually brilliant. And that was a temptation for him to just stay on that level. And that's no longer happening because speech doesn't form in his mind. But so instead of that, he went into the road, into the depth of his heart. And to be around his presence is just amazing. It's wonderful. So whatever happens, whatever weird shit happens, it's for the good. It can only be that way if you're on this path. Your mind may tell you a lot of different stories. I invite you to question them. Okay. So thank you for joining us. You wasted another evening listening to a lot of talk, but I hope it made some sense to you. Namaste. Be well.
Namaste.